Thanks for joining our monthly community webcast. I'm Jürgen Kress, part of the Oracle Digital Assistant product management team. In case you missed one of our webcasts, on-demand recordings are available. For details, please see our monthly community newsletters. In today's presentation, Grant Ronald will talk about best practice for conversational user experience. Good afternoon, Grant, and welcome to our webcast.
Thank you, Jürgen. Pleased to be here.
Please feel free to post your questions via the conference questions and answer tool or at Twitter #PaaSCommunity. At the end of the webcast, we will answer your questions. Slides are available at our community workspace. Please do tweet and blog about products and services which are available today. Please do not blog about the roadmap and future service. Objective of the call is to introduce the Oracle Digital Assistant, our chatbot solution. Oracle Digital Assistant is a platform to build conversational user interfaces. Pre-built skills out of the box bots are available for HCM, Service Cloud, and Oracle Transportation Management. You as a partner can extend skills or build custom bots for your customers. Next slide. In today's agenda, I will start with a brief community update and hand over to Grant to talk about the best practices for Oracle Digital Assistant. We will wrap up the call with the call to actions and answer your questions. In case you missed the global kickoff call with Suhas Ulia, you can watch it on demand at tinyo.com/OracleSales2020. You can connect SaaS with Oracle Integration Cloud, and you can innovate SaaS with Oracle Digital Assistant, and you can extend SaaS with Oracle Visual Builder and Process functionality. Please watch the webcast on demand. For you as a partner, you can use the same sales kits that we use Oracle internal to support our sales teams. I would like to highlight the Oracle Digital Assistant sales kit with the battle card that provides all information and the customer presentation in PowerPoint format. Oracle Sales Central supports you as a partner through the whole sales cycle. You prepare with the battle cards, you discover with the elevator pitch and call scripts, you develop with demos and free trials, you present the customer presentation deck and prove the value with the customer success stories. Please make sure that you access the Digital Assistant Sales Kit and the Sales Kit to modernize apps with Oracle Digital Assistant at the salescentral.oracle.com. For you as a partner, we offer a series of free hands-on trainings to extend Oracle Digital Assistant for HCM, Service Cloud, Transportation Management. Registration for the trainings in September in Europe, Middle East, and Africa is open. Please visit tinyo.com, Oracle Chatbot Kit, and please read our newsletter for further trainings. We also offer now a free online training, including a free online exam for Oracle Digital Assistant. It's a nice overview exam, so please visit competencycenter.oracle.com. You can also take the new 2020 implementation exam at a Pearson VUE test center. Today's presentation is part of our virtual developer meetups. If you have not joined our groups across EMEA and now also in Sao Paulo, please join us to network and learn more about best practice sessions like today. You find an overview of all developer meetups at developercommunity.blog/meetups. As part of those virtual meetups, we recently did run a series of 6 events, which includes also hands-on training for Oracle Digital Assistant. You can watch the course at YouTube, and you can take the hands-on exams at Katakoda. With this short introduction, I would like to hand over to you, Grant. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you, Jürgen, and thank you everybody for coming along to this session. So over the next, let's see, 54 minutes, I want to share with you my experiences of building digital assistants or chatbots. Now, many of in this call might be Oracle partners, but this isn't focused purely on only a lot of these lessons learned are kind of generic or general best practices for getting the most out of building chatbots. Because what we do know is that people are technically building chatbots, but often falling short in building great chatbots. Now, why is that the case? Well, I think the first thing we've got to really acknowledge that conversational interfaces, chatbots, are a new paradigm for us, for many of us, building web apps or desktop apps before. Conversational design is different because the medium that we're using, language, is itself very organic and it's very imprecise. I mean, let's face it, that humor and poetry and metaphors and idioms are all using words in different contexts in order to paint a particular picture, in some case, in the case of humor, to create a misdirection. So we have a challenge that the basic building blocks of chatbots use or conversation engagements are words, and those themselves can be very ambiguous. So how do we build chatbots or digital assistants that can get the most out of a conversation? So these are my kind of top, I think that's probably started off as top 10, but we're down to about top 15 tips of having worked on about 100 or so different projects. The first one we're going to talk about is probably the most obvious. In some ways, I debate whether to put this slide in, but it is actually one of the most critical. So you don't start off right, then you will have challenges further on as you develop your project. And that is, you've got to design your conversational project and think about the things which make it different. Now, in Oracle, and I know this is something that other companies like Google, Microsoft do, but in Oracle, we call this a CDX workshop, Conversation Design Experience Workshop. And the whole idea is, before you even lift up a tool to start building, you think about what you want to achieve. Why have you chosen to build a chatbot or a conversational interface? Is it because it's a cool example? Is it because you think it'll save your business money? Is it something that will take load off, for example, a call center, especially in times like these with the coronavirus crisis, that people are maybe having demands on call centers where they themselves have got reduced staff? What is it you're aiming for? The next thing is well, what are the use cases that really are best supported by a conversational interface? Because again, one of the problems I've seen often is that people start building a chatbot, and we look at it and go, that's great, that's all very well. What's it done? How has it really helped the business? And it's not really, in some cases, it's just a use case that someone came up with. And it's not always the use case which has the greatest use of NLP or is using all the features of the platform. Sometimes the best use case is the one that gives you the highest value. And that itself might be just a basic, simple conversation like, where's my order? I want to track my order. That itself might be a simple enough use case to start off with. So what we want to try and stress here is that when you're starting a conversational design project, what is it you're aiming at? What are the measures of success? Again, we've seen examples where a customer might decide, well, at the end of the conversation, we'll get the chatbot to say, has this been useful, or have I helped you? Are you satisfied with your experience? Which is all very good and well, until you come along to the example of, let's say, a mythical chatbot which is helping you with your tax. And the chatbot helps you out and says you owe us $50,000 in tax. Now it asks you, please rate your experience. Whilst the chatbot might have done the right thing, you've got to recognize that you may well not get the positive, glowing review from an end user at that point. So have a look at your measures of success. And the measures of success is also important about where you measure success. One of my colleagues has got a great phrase about, the day you deliver your chatbot is not the time to pop the champagne. That's when the hard work starts. It's when your chatbot goes live is when you will get all the failures that you didn't think you would get, or the edge cases that you didn't, or the areas where your NLP is not robust enough. So as a project, you've got to be buying in for the life cycle. And one of the most critical elements we've seen, and this is something we've seen with our greatest successes and also the biggest failures we've had, is has the management bought in for the full life cycle? And that includes where you go live and where the bot is likely to fail, because it probably will fail quite spectacularly in some cases in your first deployments. So are you willing to fail, and are you supporting the full life cycle that you will learn from those failures and iterate and make the bot smarter? And the final point here is whether you've got the right skills. Again, many of you may well have experience of building a web app, so you understand security and APIs and JavaScript. Have you got basic conversational design skills? You know, are you thinking about the words that you use? And I'll talk a little bit more about the actual words of conversational design later on. But really, everything else in this presentation is underpinned by the fact that you have thought about what this project is going to achieve and whether the management knows it's the right use case, the right measures of success, and it's bought in for the long term as well. AI is one of those buzzwords that's getting thrown around an awful lot, and there seems to be a kind of expectation that AI just magically knows everything. And of course, there's a lot of smart things going on in the background, but essentially it's processing and looking at and churning through huge amounts of data. And the success of your bot in terms of its NLP, its natural language processing, relies heavily on how good the AI is, but in equal measure, if not even more, it will also rely on how good your training data is and how good your intent design is. And this is, again, a common problem I've seen where the design of the intent within your digital assistant or skill is suboptimal. And what I mean by suboptimal, well, I mean, let's think of a very simple example like cancel pizza and order pizza. I mean, you and I know that canceling a pizza and ordering a pizza are two very different statements. I want to cancel a pizza, I want to order a pizza. However, when you look at it, you might find that there's actually a huge amount of commonality in the wording you use. And you may well find that even though you recognize that two use cases are very different to the users of the business. But if you look at the phraseology that might be used to derive or to trigger that intent, you might see a lot of commonality. So the intent design is one of the most important things to get right at the beginning. And of course, on platforms like Oracle Digital Assistant, you can test out how good your NLP is very quickly just by creating your intents, training them, and there's a built-in intent tester, so you don't have to go to the point of creating conversations. And of course, when you throw into the mix things like negation, again, this is a problem that's we all struggle with, because certainly in the English language, it's not just the appearance of the word not, for example, which will negate a sentence, although it will do. We can negate a word by using a prefix like in or un or im, for example. And of course, we can stack those up. We can have nots, we can have double negatives, and we can use the prefixes as well. So again, whilst it might seem obvious to you that two use cases are very different, when you break this down, does the AI really able to classify those differences? Because remember, most of what we're attempting here is a classification problem, not an understanding. We still really don't understand the essence of what people are saying. It's a classification. So get the intent design right, and once you've got the intent design right, train the model with good quality utterances. Probably one of the main problems I see with the quality of NLP in a lot of the projects I work on is a developer has thrown together half a dozen training utterances for an intent based on what they think the use case is. And that's fine for demonstrating to your boss that, hey, when I ask for pizza, the bot understands pizza. And I ask for status of an order and it understands that. But that is very limiting in terms of how real users might want to speak to the bot and how the model should be trained to cope with that. So training the utterances isn't just a job for a developer, and it's not even a case of simply looking through your call logs, for example, and establishing, because the way people speak on the phone might be different from how you make the same request to a digital assistant. And I think of the way I might ask a friend to play music versus asking Alexa to play music. I'm much more precise and direct with Alexa. So whilst we can harvest training utterances from things like existing call logs, we can't always guarantee that those are the right training utterances for the job in hand. And it's amazing how we can accidentally or inadvertently skew our models. I mean, there's a lot of talk about how you might introduce bias in artificial intelligence, whether it's through a gender balance or something, or imbalance. But even the simple case of one of your utterances using the word please much more than another utterance could in fact skew the intent model, that if any input is given with the word please, it skews it, even though the word please, in terms of understanding the intent, is really not important. So defining the model, defining the intent, training the utterances is obviously that key to getting your NLP. And something we've done recently in Oracle was we published a white paper on best practices for creating utterances. If you need to synthesize these, what are the approaches you might take? So moving on, talking further in about intents, there are many ways that people might ask the same thing. And this was a use case that came up with a major customer, where the primary use case, or one of the use cases the customer had, was returns policy. And we trained the model using the customer's data with phrases like, what's your returns policy? I want to return this item. How do I return this item? And the bot went live, and the first input the bot got was, I bought this jacket for my daughter and it doesn't fit. And the bot said, I don't understand. Now, you and I and someone in a call center would probably be able to make the leap in understanding that if you've told me you've bought something and it's not suitable, you probably want to return it. But we hadn't taught the bot that. We'd only taught the bot that people will ask, what's your returns policy, and various variations of that phrase. So what we recognized is that returns policy can actually be triggered by different use cases. You can have people explicitly asking your returns policy. You can have people asking or telling you that something is not suitable because it doesn't fit, it's the wrong size. And you have maybe a class of question where people want to return something because it's broken. Now, what we did in this bot was we created 3 separate intents with their own utterances. Now, regardless of which one was triggered, we still answered this question the same way. But by separating these out, it gave us a number of advantages. The first one was, linguistically, we had intents which were tighter. Okay, things about specifically asking returns policy has a very different set of words and phrases versus something like, I bought a DVD and it's scratched. So we were able to create maybe a stronger NLP model by creating terms which are much more closely aligned, was the first thing. The second thing is, we decided at a later point that in fact we might give the same answer, i.e. here's our returns policy, but we might give a little bit of extra information to the user. So if somebody says, I bought this and it didn't fit, we might say, sorry to hear that, here's a returns policy. Whereas if somebody explicitly asks, what's your returns policy, we wouldn't say, sorry to hear that. And the third reason of having these split up was, when it came to looking at new use cases, we could ascertain quite quickly that most people were triggering the returns policy because something was bought and it was the wrong size. And that itself was useful information to the business, because then we could decide, well, look, maybe we need to handle this in a different way. Rather than just giving them a returns policy, we could also do things like give them details on their nearest store to return this to, or a voucher, whatever it might be. So different use cases, the same use cases might be triggered by different classes of questions, and it's sometimes useful to break those out into separate intents as well. Now, as I touched on in a couple of slides ago, chatbots are only as good as the data that you train the chatbot with for understanding the the natural language. And good data really only comes from hard work. Okay, there will be quite an effort in collecting and maintaining and cleansing this data as well, but it's absolutely worth it. So one of the first things you have to do is whilst I talked about creating utterances, ideally you want to get utterances from real users, because whilst I might envisage people ordering a pizza by saying, hey, I want to order a pizza, I can't necessarily tell you how a 17-year-old guy might order pizza versus an 80-year-old person. They may well use different phrases, different terminology. So the only way we really know is getting data from our users, and that will ultimately come from conversations logs. Now, one of the suggestions we try to really encourage is that when you're training your model, and let's imagine you train your model every weekend, okay? You look at your logs over the week and you extract the conversations and you decide there are new phrases to add to your training model. We recommend this 80-20 split. And the idea is you train the model with 80% of your phrases, your new training phrases, and test it with 20%. Now, the reason for doing that is what it means is you're always testing your model with data it's not specifically been trained with. And that ensures you get a better quality of testing as well. Now, in the Oracle platform, we have this batch testing capability where you can create a number of phrases and test that. And this is really important because it gives you a baseline. That's the way that you can tell on Monday the 1st that your bot is working at a particular level, but on Monday the 8th, when you've retrained it with new data, that it's performing in a better way, it's smarter. And also, hugely important is that as Oracle or any vendor evolves the platform and updates its models, are they performing better for your bot as well? Because you want to know that when my vendor rolls out an update to the platform, is my bot performing as well as it has been? And one important thing is not just to test success. You're not simply testing, hey dude, I want to order some pizza this evening. You're not testing only that resolves to the order pizza. You also want to test that any failure terms or out of scope terms are correctly handled, and also phrases which might mean a different intent yet have many of the similar words. So effectively, you're trying to trick the bot into understanding something that it doesn't. Make those tests as well. And in fact, that's something that we are adding to the platform as well to cover those. We have analytics and insights in the platform. And again, on most platforms, you'll have these capabilities to see what your unresolved intents as well. And I often get the question about, well, how many utterances should I have? And whilst the general rule of thumb is that, these AI models thrive on more data, that's only the case if it's good quality data. In some cases, I've recommended customers to reduce the amount of utterances they have in order to get better quality, rather than just throwing in 3,000 phrases which have never really been curated to understand if they are, in fact, very strong representations of that particular intent. So don't always go for more being best. And of course, this is an ongoing cycle of test, fix, repeat. That every time you release your bot, you're continually looking at logs and retraining it as well. I should actually mention as well, we're going to leave some time for questions. I see there's maybe a few questions coming in, but I'll deal with some of these at the end as well. But we've looked at intents and training models. Let's start to look at how you design conversations. Again, this is probably a very common issue we've seen. I see it in our own internal forums where people say, hey, I'm building a bot, and the bot says, do you want to do this? Type 1 to do something, type 2 to do something else, type 3 to do something else. And my point there is you've essentially re-implemented an IVR system. The problem with an IVR system is you have to wait and listen to all the options that this automated assistant understands. Where I want to turn the problem round with a chatbot is I tell you exactly what I want in my language, and you work out as a chatbot whether you can deal with it or not and how you deal with that. So when I see people designing chatbots around, select one, select two, select three, that raises a red flag. I'm not saying it's always bad, but that itself raises a red flag for me. We also have this situation where, in a web app, it would be easy to have a checkbox or a drop-down list or something. But if you've got a huge amount of data, you've got to think about how you can deal with that differently in a conversation. If I was to ask somebody 50 questions to get information, they'd probably get pretty bored by the first 7 or 8 questions. So could you gather information in different ways? Something we've working on in some of our own apps or chatbots for expenses, for example, is that when you create an expense, you can photograph a receipt, and it uses optical character recognition to say, hey, you were on Starbucks on the 25th and you spent $8 on a coffee and a bagel. Do you want to submit this expense? That is much obviously more streamlined than asking, where did you go? How much did you spend? What currency? What would you spend it on? Was there anyone else there? So think about how you can default this information as well. Even things like location. It might well be that you can detect that somebody's in a particular location, they're in Starbucks, or if they're based in the US, then we're going to make an assumption that your currency is going to be defaulted to US dollars based on those things as well. So the bottom line is don't be harnessed or constrained by thinking of a web app. Think about if you had a smart assistant sitting next to you who ordered pizza or tracked your parcel or did your expenses. What would you do? How would that conversation play out with them rather than doing it through a web app? Now, massively important, I've talked about web apps. With web apps, you have colors and fonts and animated GIFs and all the like to bring forward your brand, your corporate brand. With a conversational assistant, all you have are the words or the voice is the only way you can communicate your brand. So the way you can do that is through the bot's personality. And one of the first things I see, and I see a lot of customers making similar mistakes where, with the greatest respect, the developer has been left to output the words that the bot should say. And that developer is not necessarily the person who is best qualified to bring forth the brand of your company. I consider a very simple example here in the UK, British Airways versus Virgin Atlantic, both airlines, but hugely different personalities in terms of how they convey their brand. And you've got to think about that in a bot as well. So some of the things you should be doing is sitting down and looking at, well, who is our bot? Okay, what's the brand of our bot? What kind of things should they say? Even to the point, and one of our most successful customers that we've been working with built a whole backstory to their bot. And although that whole backstory is not necessarily made public, it helps the businesses that are developing the bot say, well, what would our bot say, knowing that, we might say, hey, our bot is a 27-year-old female. She loves sport. She's got a 3-year-old daughter. Again, it's trying to put a kind of concept in place that helps you come up with the words that the bot will say when you understand what the persona of that bot is as well. So think about that bot persona, the words you're using, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on about how no one sets out to deliberately upset your customers or users, but the simple mistakes with words, things like "you neglected to supply." versus if you could tell me, or if you could tell us. In one case, it's kind of putting the fault or the blame on the customer. You neglected to supply. It's your fault you didn't give that. Whereas we could have something that's a little bit more apologetic, saying, if you could tell us the order number, for example. It's much more, it smooths the conversation much more. So consider the bot personality, think of what you want as the brand, and build a potential backstory around that so that you can start thinking. And there's a bot that me and my team have been working on called Artie, and we have a whole story about who Artie is, and we think about what would Artie say, how would Artie respond to that, and that also becomes really good in handling when things go off topic, things like swearing or people asking for jokes or sending pictures or those kind of things. You think, well, how would Artie handle this? And of course, the question comes up about human-like quality. I've talked about a bot personality, but I'm not saying you're trying to pass the bot off as a human. What we're saying is there are elements to human conversation which we should try and capture and use. So simple things like varying responses. Okay, if I ask a question like, what's your order number? The bot asks, what's your order number? And you say something like, I'm sorry, I don't have my order number. And the bot says, what's your order number? I've told you I don't have an order. What's your order number? That becomes very frustrating very quickly. Whereas if we vary the responses, do things like recognize where a conversation is being stuck, okay? So the bot recognizes, hey, I've asked this question 3 times. There's a problem. Okay, I'm not getting the information I expect. So one of us is not completely engaged in this conversation as well. So vary the responses. Keep the messages relatively short and concise as well, because quite often, if you think on a platform like WhatsApp, you haven't got a huge amount of screen estate to be having huge amounts of information. So you certainly wouldn't expect users to be scrolling through messages. That's when you get to the too long didn't read problem. There's something that I mentioned the example that asking for an order number and the user says, like, I don't have an order number. There are other things you can do where something I call progressive disclosure, where each time the bot asks the same question, it would maybe give a little bit more information on how it's expecting you to respond. That way, when you're speaking to an experienced user and you just ask them a question, what size of pizza do you want? Large. Great, we've got the information. But if you said what size of pizza to a new user and they say, what's the biggest one you've got? Okay, so we haven't understood that, but the bot might respond, if you could tell me what pizza size, I can order you small, medium, or large. So I've given a little bit more information that second time, and that happens to be enough information to get the user over that obstacle. Whereas for an experienced user, it's kind of tedious to say, hey, what size of pizza you want? I already know that you have small, medium, or large pizza, so don't tell me that. Another point that I think is hugely important here is don't be afraid to verify understanding. As I mentioned at the beginning, language can be very ambiguous, and even speaking to someone in a call center, it's okay to say, for them to say, I wasn't quite sure, is it this thing or this thing that you want? So that's all okay as well. And there are other ideas like reflective listening. So when someone asks for something, I want a large pizza, sure, I'll get you a large pizza. I've reflected, I've shown, I've understood what you're saying. And be careful about things like empathy or humor. Now, I say this from an Oracle enterprise chatbot position. There may well be use cases where the whole focus of your bot is to be humorous or understanding, but generally on that I suppose Oracle ecosystem of expenses or HR, I wouldn't generally be trying to crack jokes too much, because it can be very easily misunderstood. Now, this is one of my favorite topics for for chatbots. As soon as anyone asks me, can you review our chatbot, the first thing I do is ask it questions like, are you a chatbot? Who am I speaking to? Who built you? Are you real? Now, why am I doing that? Well, I suppose in my case, I'm trying to research and find out. But even for a real user, there's a reason we ask those questions. And up to about, I've seen one report, about 40% of all engagements with a chatbot can be small talk. Is aiding discovery. Are you a chatbot? It's actually useful to know if I'm speaking to a real human or not. If I ask questions like, what do you do? What can you help me with? Again, those are ways of guiding me into common actions. If I swear at the bot, that's useful because you might be swearing because you're frustrated. And if you're frustrated, I need to handle that. And the best way of handling it is not to simply say, I don't understand, I don't understand. And equally, there might be certain swear phrases that are actually positive, like somebody says, hell yeah. If you want to order something, then the presence of a swear word might not necessarily be a negative in that context as well. So I would expect most chatbots you build to handle small talk because it's useful. It's aiding discovery, it's handling frustrations, it's common actions like, forget this conversation, quit. These kind of things are important to understand. And equally, anything that your bot responds to intelligently makes it look way smarter, even if it's out of its use case, than simply saying, sorry, I didn't understand you. So even if you do ask it, would you like to go out for dinner with me? Then if the bot can respond in an intelligent way, then that in fact is a positive conversational experience rather than just simply saying, I don't understand. And of course, you might use this to reinforce the bot's personality, or handle the conversation back to the known use cases. So a great example that we often show in one of our training courses is flower ordering bot, and someone asks, what's the weather? And the bot responds, it's sunny and it's a wonderful day for ordering flowers. So we're getting the conversation back on track as well. The other area I think is really interesting with language is that you can't always solve problems with more and more or more powerful NLP, because sometimes you will say something and even a human would struggle to understand the differences. So for example, the flower ordering bot, I say, I ordered flowers on Monday and they haven't arrived and it's Wednesday. So is that check order status or is that a complaint? Now, it's difficult for us to know because it could be either, you could argue. What you can do is use a clever use of language to show that you've understood and then check what the right thing to do. So, and the example I see in the slide, the bot might respond, let me deal with that for you. So the first thing the bot has said is, I understand you. You have a problem. I am going to deal with that. But then we go into a disambiguation sentence. Do you want me to first of all check the status, or should I transfer you to a manager for an escalation? So that is something that that you could handle those use cases where even a human would struggle. And a technique, the last bullet point there is actually a technique I've used in a number of cases where do you have to even disambiguate at all? The example I have here is an internal bot that some teams were working on where there was a question about the minimum bonus that somebody could be paid and the maximum bonus that somebody could be paid. And the bot sometimes struggled understanding the difference between, if they didn't explicitly use the words minimum, maximum, hey, I've got questions about the limits on a bonus, for example. Rather than trying to work out, well, did they mean minimum bonus or maximum bonus? What we decided to do was the bot always responded with, the minimum bonus you can give is X and the maximum bonus you can give is Y. No one ever complained that the bot gave them more information than they actually asked for. So sometimes you don't even have to disambiguate at all. Last couple of things we'll look at before we go to the kind of open Q&A session is how you can handle the things that you know that you don't know. Okay, there's a famous phrase from Donald Rumsfeld. That's the picture there about things we know and the things the unknown unknowns. there are some things that your bot will be asked that you know are completely out of scope. So in this example, I've got a banking bot. It can do some basic banking transactions, but it doesn't do share dealing, for example. Now, what we could do is, rather than saying, right, share dealing is completely out of scope, so we'll deal with that the same way as if people had said, you know, what's the football results? We'll simply say, I'm sorry, I don't understand you. Or if we think that that is a known out of scope use case, then maybe we could at least respond with an intelligent response. So in this example, in the screenshot, if the user says, I want to buy 500 Oracle stock, we can answer, I would love to, but currently I'm not allowed to trade stock. And we could maybe include a URL of, you can do it on our website or something. The point is, although the bot has been designed not to handle that use case, we can still at least intelligently respond to the user in a way that at least shows that we've understood what they've said. So think of your current use cases for your bot, and then look at what you think other use cases you might be asked, which are out of scope, and decide whether it's worth the effort of handling those. In many cases, it might be worth that, just so your bot can handle these more intelligently. Now, I've generally been talking about building chatbots regardless of the type of channel, but for anyone who's building specific to voice, there are some other design decisions to take into account. Limitation of the channel. Okay, so in a pizza ordering bot on the web, we might have a carousel of pizza pictures. That's not going to work on a voice channel. So we have to think about how we would handle if somebody asks that question on our voice channel. What's our techniques there? We might not have be able to do the full set of wording, because I think people's ability to listen to an automated voice for longer than a few minutes is probably, or longer, a few seconds in fact, is probably quite limited. So you might have much more concise responses and confirmations as well. You might have very specific intents for voice, okay? So if you didn't catch something, you might say, can you repeat that, or what did you say? Where you wouldn't have that on a channel like WhatsApp, for example. You may also want to disambiguate certain data. So, you know, a word like Andy, for example, you might find that on a voice channel, the voice to text would interpret that as ANDY. But if you feel that there are other different spellings of that, we might have to disambiguate that, even though that we wouldn't have to do in a written channel, because somebody would write it correctly. And the last thing is building synonyms for any misheard phrases. So for example, let's just say an example for pizzas, and we say, what kind of pizza do you want? And the person wants to say veggie, but it comes over as wedgie. Now, because wedgie is a word, it might say, oh, wedgie is not a type of pizza, or it might be misheard. So what we might consider doing is that we could set up wedgie as a synonym for veggie pizza. So even if the voice to text gets it wrong, then at least if there are those common mishearings, we could still understand, oh, I think you want a veggie pizza. You know, yes. Very important for bots is how to help people. We've seen probably the first problem with chatbots is that when you open up a channel, what do? You're sitting there looking at a blinking cursor, and it's like, okay, well, what can I ask you? So quite often it's good if the bot can start a conversation. We had this with one customer where they noticed that people opened the chat widget and then did nothing because they didn't know what to do. And I suppose it's analogous to the phone ringing. You pick up the phone and nothing happens. Where convention is that somebody says, hi, it's Grant here, how are you? So you might want to get the bot to start the conversation by kicking off saying, hey, I'm Artie, I can help you do X, Y, and Z, or just ask me anything else. Okay, so we give an indication of the kind of thing and hint to what might be expected. You might want to offer relevant actions. In some channels, like the web channel, we know customers who have said, look, I would like a menu button to appear on the chat widget, or a reset button to reset the conversation. If that's what they want to do, that's fine. Equally, we can drop in during the conversation the various ways of getting help or resetting a conversation. You know, any problems, just say help. Might be something you kind of sprinkle into the conversations, or if we ever get stuck, you can always just exit the conversation or reset the conversation, whatever wording you might want to use. And don't use the user hanging. Try to give them an indication of what you're expecting and confirm that something has happened that you've heard. And if the user says, hey, I want to transfer money, you wouldn't just, you know, not respond. You would say, yeah, I've transferred that money for you. It's happened, whatever. So don't leave the user hanging. Let them know what's going to happen next. And that includes things like handing off to a human agent as well. And all part of the error handling is also reducing the surface areas for errors as well. So guide the conversation on what's expected. You know, you could give examples that you require. You could validate the data. So a simple example on the pizza ordering, if I say I want to order a pizza at 3 a.m., it would be good to validate that 3 a.m. as immediately as possible. Okay, so when the user, the bot might respond, sure, I can help you order a pizza, but I'm afraid we close at 11. Okay, so validate data when you can. Open-ended questions. We see this a lot, and again, it's a very natural thing to do. Can I help you with anything else? But an open-ended question like that leaves you literally open to people saying, yeah, can I have a big house in the country? Okay, stupid response, but the point is, if you think there's something else you can help the user with, try to guide them on what that might be. So you've ordered pizza, rather than just saying anything else you want, you could say, would you like to order some drinks or cookies or dips or something else? Be careful about when you're committing a transaction. You know, when you want the user to confirm something. We see a lot of users or chatbots using a yes or no, and that's kind of okay, but pressing a yes or no requires you to have understood what you're saying yes or no to. And people don't always read exactly what's in the dialogue bubble. Sometimes if you put a verb, you know, you actually confirm the word that it's actually confirming the transaction. You know, send money, it might be, rather than do you want to send money, yes or no. The button might actually be send money or cancel transaction, whatever we choose. That way, it's almost like a double confirmation as well. And of course, I've talked about, and you see in the image there, you can use carousel components or quick replies or buttons which help guide the user on exactly what's requested at a particular point. Because the thing is, with the best intentions of the world and all the research, people will do and say things that you never imagined. But that's okay, because when the bot gets it wrong, that's your chance to make the bot smarter as well. So the last slide here, I think, is failing gracefully. Now, I'm not suggesting that anyone says to the user, you know, you're an idiot, you got this wrong. But there are things that we might say, and you neglected to supply, or rather than saying, if you could tell us, or let's say that words like invalid order ID. I mean, that screams to me that that's a message that's been written by a developer. You know, you ask for an order number, it's not found when they do a database call or something, and you say invalid order ID. But let's think conversationally. Is that really the right thing to say, or isn't it a case of, well, actually, I can't find that order? That's actually a smoother way, and it's conversationally, it's more correct to maybe respond in that way as well. And of course, if you can try, and when the user does fail, to give them options to get them back on track. So that might be, if you haven't understood something, or you're maybe stuck in some kind of error loop, you could say, well, look, here's the things I can do. Is it one of these things, or shall I pass you off to our human agent as well? And again, as I mentioned, you can try and sprinkle into the conversation the various key phrases that help your bot do things like reset the conversation. I mean, I have engagements with customers where they have a number of keywords, and I'm always doubtful, because if you have to teach your user how to engage with the bot by using specific keywords, then you're not building a conversational interface, you're building a command line interface. But there's nothing wrong with dropping into the conversation that hey, you can ask for help at any time, or if you're stuck, you can always ask for a human, these kind of words. You're not saying keywords, you're just saying that these are things that I can also do as well. So what I'm going to do, I think I've gone through the slides here. There's a number of questions in the Q&A, which I think I might be able to go through now. So
yeah.
what
Jürgen, hi, Grant. Thanks for the excellent presentation.
Mm-hmm.
So please take a look in the Q&A, and I do the call to action, and then we answer the questions. So the ODA learning material is available. Please make use of it. And there's a wonderful resource that Grant and the team put together at bit.ly/ODA doc. And please visit also the Sales Central site to get the sales kits, including the PowerPoint presentation that you can edit and the battle cards. If you're not yet a member in our developer or integration partner community, please make sure that you register. You can also find the slides from today's presentation in the partner community workspace. You will also receive a follow-up email with all the presentation links. And please become a certified expert at the Competency Center. As you saw, we have now a free certification available. If you want to try Oracle Digital Assistant, it's available as a free trial at oracle.com/try it. That brings me to the questions. So, Grant, we have a lot of questions.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll read the question out, and I'll answer it. So thanks for the question. So first one from Youssef: how many utterances do you suggest would be best to provide for a single intent? So on the Oracle platform, my answer is you need as many utterances in order to get the responses that you want. Okay, now that's a bit of a cop-out, but what it means is that I would aim for starting off about 20 or 30 utterances. I would, on a production system, be looking at maybe 100 or so, but as long as they're good quality, I might find it's leveling out, that simply adding 2,000 more utterances doesn't make it 20 times better. It might only make it 1% better. So there's no definitive answer. It depends, but as a ballpark, start with 20 or 30, aim for about 100, but I don't hold me to it if somebody's building something with 500 utterances. Leonardo, what's the difference between HT and TM trainer? HT, we have two training models. HT is a training model which is much more rules-based. TM is our deep learning model. For most production systems, I would be using trainer TM. Paul, last time I checked, the dialog flow editor was not good. Any improvements on that? No auto-completion, just a basic editor. Fair comment, Paul. We are working at trying to improve the YAML editor. And in fact, one of the goals we have is writing less and less YAML. So we have a conversation designer, which allows you to do a first cut for rapid prototyping. But we're also adding stuff that, for example, our composite bag gives you much more functionality in the composite bag itself and moves it away from the YAML. So you don't have to write as much YAML on that as well. Next question, could you share the configuration guide path? I'm afraid I don't understand your question. If you could maybe retype it with a bit more detail, sorry about that. Next question, if we plan for chatbots in multiple languages, should we need a separate language professionals to make sure the bot is trained properly? Good question. So currently in Oracle's bot platform, we can create a bot in a single language like English and use translation services in order to dynamically, for example, understand that if somebody speaks to the bot in German, it will translate it into English and then run against our English model. And then responses go back as English, but are translated on the fly to German. You don't necessarily need, well, in fact, you don't need somebody who understands German. Let's say you're supporting German, French, Italian. You don't need somebody to train the model who's German, French, and Italian just to train the model, because it's only going to be trained in one language. However, for your responses, and you can use something called resource bundles, it would make sense to have somebody to translate those for you automatically, rather than relying on a translation service. Can you share documents related to the integration of on-premise EBS, R12, and ODA? I'm sorry, that's not a question I could answer at the moment. Sorry. Phil, Grant, would it be possible to share Artie's backstory? We are intending to publish Artie a little bit more formally. We've had a little bit of delay because of some resourcing issues, but we're back on track building our next version of Artie, and we're going to share the source code and various other things. What's actually interesting with Artie, we decided, we went through a number of discussions, and we decided that there was a number of features of Artie that we thought was quite important. We wanted some Artie was, we decided, rather than being a human personality, was going to be a robotic personality, and deliberately would misunderstand some things, would use language that's a little bit formal sometimes as well, and so we kind of built a backstory around this robot, and who's very smart, but sometimes too smart, and almost autistic spectrum, very literal about things as well. So that was part of the message, or part of the backstory about Artie. But we will publish more formally the whole Artie story as well. Is there any UX guidelines for chatbots? Do we need specialized copy content is good at English and grammar for chatbot language? Good question. So we are, Oracle have a group who are building what the Oracle tone of voice is for our bots. I don't know how much of that stuff is public facing yet, although I know some has been talking at Oracle World. I think the answer to the question is, you don't have to necessarily be good at English and grammar. You have to be good at crafting words that get the best out of the conversation. So, it's just because somebody is a documentation writer, for example, who's very good at English, might not necessarily be the person who puts the tone of voice or has the humor. When you think of, maybe quite often you'll see brands on Twitter where they have people in the social media department who are very, very smart, articulate, but also very funny and responding in social media. And it might even be people like that you find. But UX guidelines, good question. We have got some of this coming out. I don't know how much of it's formally been published though. Another question, how do we handle language conversation? A language conversation, sorry. I guess that's with multi-language. So we can use on-fly translation services. So if you build your bot in English, for example, but you have offices in Germany and Spain, and they want to use the bot, then we can use on-the-fly translation services to do that, if that's what you're asking there. Phil, can the bot be taught to handle the typo errors that occur with dyslexic people, confusing D and B? Good question. Generally speaking, you would probably find the language models have a certain amount of resilience to typos, those kind of things, just because of enough of the other words give the right signals. But if, for example, you expected a word to be very typically mistyped or mistranslated or whatever it might be, then it wouldn't do any harm to add that to your training models as well. So I can't think of a great example, but if you're, for example, your company name's mistyped or something, whatever it might be, then training the model with that wouldn't be a bad thing to do. Graham, do you think humans would generally prefer to speak to another human, and the chatbots can risk sending customers to your competition who promise always speak to a human in your language? Very good question. You're right that in many cases, people, you would think, wouldn't you want to get through to a human? But the way I would respond to this is a number of ways. Is firstly, there seems to be a generational thing that for many people, they don't want to speak to a human. That's one thing. The second thing is, you might not, speaking to a human might be a trade-off. Yes, you can speak to a human, but it takes you 40 minutes to hang on the line. So yeah, that might be a good option to have, but as a first pass, maybe we can still get the bot to answer the question for you. You might have situations where, for example, you're on the train into London and you want to check something, and you don't necessarily either want to have a conversation, or your conversation might be broken up over a period of time. And by using a conversational assistant, you might be able to get through the whole conversation in an hour, in a few minutes at a time, rather than if it's something that you couldn't dedicate that whole time to speak to somebody. You can just have a bit of the conversation. As long as it hasn't timed out, you can still keep that conversation going. So I think there are many cases where people are absolutely fine with the chatbot because they're getting quick answers. And the last thing to say about getting through to a human is that often the person you're speaking to has access to only the same information as the chatbot has. So if you're saying, "Where's my parcel?" and the chatbot says, "Sorry, I'm lost," and you want to complain, you'll get through to a human and they won't know where your parcel is either. They'll only have the same information. But what you can do is obviously they can deal with those but with more empathy or sympathy than the chatbot can.
Grant, we have time for one more question, and maybe we can show them the link for Artie. Go ahead.
Okay, very quick. What approaches do you recommend for feedback on the chatbot? Should every single intent have an evaluation? We actually published a white paper on that bit.ly ODA doc we have a blog called Tech Exchange, and we had some little ideas where we automatically inject a thumbs up or a thumbs down into responses, and if you click the thumbs up or thumbs down, we recognize that. Or we just listen for an intent for things like thanks or that helped or great answer, and we could register that if somebody had said that, we'll make an assumption that the thing they said before, i.e. the question, was successfully answered. And the reverse of that, if they said this isn't helping, then we could regard that as relating to the question. So we don't have to explicitly after every interaction say, "Did I help you?" because that gets pretty boring. So yeah, are we definitely oh yeah, we have run over.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. If you posted the link to RT, that's our ODA chatbot, in the chat. It's a proof of concept. Feel free to play around with it. If you have questions, if you need support, your number one contact person is your local Oracle partner manager. If you don't know this person, please contact them at tinyurl.com/oracleopn. You can also reach out to Grant or myself via Twitter and social media, and we try to support you. I would like to say thanks to everybody attending today. Thanks for the excellent presentation, Grant. I can definitely hear from your experience that you have reviewed and built many chatbots with the Oracle Digital Assistant platform, and I hope to see everybody soon again. And also thanks to Steve in the studio. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And what I'll do is those questions that haven't been answered, I'm actually going to go onto Twitter and answer them now. So if you go to GW Ronald on Twitter, if I haven't got around to answering, you'll see them there.
Grant, thank you very much. Thank you for attending. Goodbye.